Item Number SCP-Y-053. Object Class Euclid. Special Containment Procedures. SCP-Y-053 is currently housed within a specially designed containment unit designated as the Literary Isolation Chamber, located at Site Y2. This containment chamber measures 10 meters by 10 meters by 10 meters. It is constructed of reinforced steel, sealed airtight, and coated with an ink-resistant polymer. Books permitted within the chamber for containment purposes must adhere strictly to the guidelines set by the Foundation's Narrative Analysis Division, NAD. Books provided to SCP-Y-053 must contain narrative content of a suitably dark and complex nature to ensure continued containment and minimize unexpected manifestations. Entrance to SCP-Y-053's containment chamber is restricted exclusively to personnel holding Level 3 clearance or higher, and all personnel must undergo psychological screening and narrative vulnerability assessments prior to any interaction. Redirection Vestibule 053 surrounds the primary containment area and is equipped with automated deployment systems capable of rapidly introducing a selection of approved narrative texts in case of breach or anomalous manifestation. Foundation personnel responsible for direct interactions with SCP-Y-053 must wear specially designed full-body suits resistant to ink-based contamination and are required to carry handheld narrative disruption units, NDUs, devices developed specifically to mitigate the anomaly's effects during containment breaches. Any personnel showing symptoms of SCP-Y-053 exposure are to be immediately quarantined, medically evaluated, and treated in the narrative containment ward. Description: SCP-Y-053, designated as Inkblight, is a semi-sentient, ink-based anomalous entity capable of physically manifesting within narrative texts, predominantly those featuring dark, macabre, or violent thematic elements. SCP-Y-053 can occupy only a single book at any given time, displaying an apparent preference for texts containing themes akin to traditional Gothic literature, horror fiction, or grim folklore. Upon an individual reading the text inhabited by SCP-Y-053, the anomaly immediately enters and inhabits the reader's body, concurrently absorbing all ink or textual content from the book itself, leaving blank pages behind. Once a human host is infected, SCP-Y-053 induces the rapid manifestation of excessive ink secretion from the subject's ocular, oral, and auditory orifices. During infection, the host experiences a loss of bodily autonomy, as SCP-Y-053 assumes direct motor control to recreate specific scenes from the consumed narrative. SCP-Y-053 displays intricate behavioral patterns during scene recreation, including accurate line recitation and deliberate selection of nearby individuals to portray specific narrative roles, referring to them by names consistent with the book's characters. These scene recreations typically involve acts of violence or intense emotional distress, and remain strictly faithful to the source material unless impeded. Should SCP-Y-053 find itself incapable of accurately reproducing a narrative scene, it will initiate what has been classified as an off-script event, or OSE. OSEs exhibit significant deviation from original narrative structures, transforming into grotesque reinterpretations, reminiscent of traditional narratives from Brothers Grimm stories, infused with supernatural and chaotic elements. OSEs invariably escalate the severity of resultant damage, danger, and unpredictability compared to standard manifestations. Victims of OSEs frequently sustain severe injuries, though not all interactions prove fatal. After successful narrative enactment, SCP-Y-053 departs from its host, leaving them physically intact if containment personnel interventions have not inflicted collateral damage. Upon exiting the host, SCP-Y-053 rapidly evaporates surplus ink until it is reduced to approximately 500 milliliters. During this period, SCP-Y-053 manifests anomalous properties, rendering it impervious to physical impediment. However, Foundation personnel have successfully demonstrated the ability to redirect SCP-Y-053 by strategically positioning approved narrative texts in close proximity, at which point SCP-Y-053 will enter the selected book and become inert until the next reading event. Post-possession, former hosts exhibit permanent cognitive alterations. All memories related to previously read narrative materials, including books, articles, and online content, are recalled exclusively in distorted, horrific versions. For example, originally benign memories, such as news of charitable activities, become replaced by vivid and unsettling recollections containing violent, grotesque reinterpretations, despite these events never occurring. Affected individuals adamantly insist upon the authenticity of their distorted memories, describing them as equally tangible as objective reality. Test Log Y-53-EX-1. Objective: investigate SCP-Y-053's anomalous responses when exposed to narrative content devoid of violence, conflict, or distress. Procedure: Subject D-94593 was instructed to read Sunny Days at the Meadow, a children's book explicitly designed to be free of conflict or negative emotional stimuli within the SCP-Y-053 containment environment. SCP-Y-053 had reluctantly inhabited the book following a previous incident report, as it was the only one in the nearby area. Observation: Initial interactions displayed no immediate anomalous phenomena, with D-94593 reporting a calm and non-eventful reading experience. Approximately 12 minutes into exposure, SCP-Y-053 exhibited notable reluctance and slowly began manifesting within the text. Subsequently, the previously innocuous narrative underwent rapid, grotesque reinterpretations, introducing macabre and implicitly violent content. As the narrative shifted, D-94593 began reciting altered passages aloud, describing previously gentle and cheerful characters such as rabbits, birds, and butterflies as distorted, nightmarish creatures with exaggerated predatory features. The formerly idyllic meadow transformed into a bleak and oppressive landscape, filled with thorn-covered vines and ominous, ink-black pools. At approximately 18 minutes into the test, D-94593 was inhabited by the anomaly, and forced him into a physical enactment of scenes from the distorted narrative. Subject exhibited pronounced possession characteristics, including copious secretion of black ink from ocular, oral, and auditory pathways, involuntary muscular spasms, and a complete loss of autonomous control. D-94593 attempted to construct crude nests from shredded materials within the containment area, reenacting scenes where the creatures viciously competed for limited resources. The subject vocalized disturbing dialogues portraying themes of fear, betrayal, and survival, wholly divergent from the original narrative's intended messages of cooperation and joy. Notably, SCP-Y-053 manifested particular fixation on a narrative element involving a, quote, sunlight gathering ceremony, originally a gentle, joyous event. Under SCP-Y-053's influence, this event became a dark ritual wherein the meadow's inhabitants sacrificed weaker creatures to the sun, described as a malevolent entity demanding constant appeasement. SCP-Y-053 ceased its anomalous enactment after approximately 34 minutes, following spontaneous detachment from D-94593. Upon SCP-Y-053's departure, D94593 collapsed, regaining consciousness shortly thereafter, but remaining profoundly traumatized by the memories of enacted events. Subsequent psychological evaluations diagnosed severe trauma, necessitating extensive cognitive behavioral therapy, counseling, and neurological assessment. The subject displayed persistent aversion to sunlight and open spaces, indicative of lasting cognitive distortions directly linked to the anomalous reenactment. Test Log Y53-EX2. Objective: evaluate SCP-Y-053's autonomous behavioral response during prolonged narrative obstruction, testing its threshold for spontaneous disengagement. Procedure: Subject D4938 was assigned to read Reflections of Serenity, a narrative explicitly selected due to its introspective nature, peaceful content, and minimal inherent conflict. During the reading, researchers continuously intervened, systematically obstructing SCP-Y-053's attempt at coherent narrative enactment, thereby testing the anomaly's reaction to persistent interference. Observation: SCP-Y-053 demonstrated immediate engagement, manifesting rapidly upon Subject D4938's initial exposure to the text. Initial possession symptoms appeared mild, with minor ink secretions and slight physical tremors. However, as researchers continuously prevented the successful reenactment of narrative scenes, SCP-Y-053's behavior exhibited notable escalation. Approximately 20 minutes into the systematic narrative obstruction, SCP-Y-053 displayed visible agitation through intensified physiological manifestations, including heightened ink secretion and increasingly violent muscular spasms. Shortly thereafter, SCP-Y-053 initiated a pronounced and severe off-script event, OSE. The OSE rapidly deviated into extreme narrative reinterpretations, wholly unrelated to the original material. The introspective themes of Reflections of Serenity were transformed into disturbing and violent enactments involving self-harm, forced confrontations among observing personnel, and enactment of dramatic and often incoherent scenarios, implying psychological torment and existential dread. During the escalation, D4938 experienced extensive cognitive distortion and violent physical enactments, demonstrating erratic, aggressive behaviors toward observing researchers. Notably, anomalous temporal distortions manifested, causing observers to experience repeated and overlapping temporal loops of particularly violent reenactments, significantly complicating containment and intervention efforts. Observing personnel reported cognitive dissonance, severe confusion, and in some cases, temporary hallucinations directly related to SCP-Y-053's anomalous behavior. These hallucinations frequently involve distorted perceptions of time, personal identity, and surrounding environments. Several researchers temporarily lost awareness of their actual surroundings, perceiving themselves as participants within SCP-Y-053's chaotic and hostile reinterpretations. Despite repeated attempts at narrative disruption and containment, SCP-Y-053 persisted uninterrupted for an extended duration of 7 hours and 14 minutes. Only after substantial cognitive and physical expenditure did SCP-Y-053 autonomously disengage from D4938, immediately transferring its anomalous influence to the strategically placed contingency narrative, Tales of the Grimwood. Post-event assessments concluded that Subject D4938 sustained significant psychological damage, characterized by persistent paranoia, severe anxiety, recurring nightmares, and profound aversion to reflective surfaces and written narratives. Physically, D4938 incurred moderate trauma due to involuntary violent movements and self-inflicted injuries during the event. Comprehensive medical rehabilitation and intensive psychotherapy were mandated for the subject. supplemented by continuous neurological assessments to monitor and mitigate potential long-term cognitive impairments. This extended OSE highlighted SCP-Y-053's dangerous capacity to rapidly escalate into violent, unpredictable behaviors when consistently obstructed from narrative enactment. It also underscores the necessity of rigorous containment measures, emergency narrative redirection strategies, and specialized training for personnel to mitigate psychological impacts during anomalous events. Test Log Y53-EX3. Objective: determine SCP-Y-053's capacity to replicate known anomalous characteristics from documented SCP entities when transcribed into a controlled, narrative format. Procedure: a meticulously constructed narrative based on SCP-Y-010, Death Knell. Incident Reports was authored by Foundation researchers. The narrative explicitly mirrored documented anomalous effects associated with SCP-Y-010. D-Class Subject D5122 read the crafted narrative within SCP-Y-053's containment facility. Observation: SCP-Y-053 rapidly manifested within the narrative text, swiftly engaging in possession of D5122. Remarkably, SCP-Y-053 precisely reproduced SCP-Y-010's predictive anomalous properties, spontaneously vocalizing highly accurate predictions regarding previous deaths within the containment site. These predictions were subsequently confirmed, validating SCP-Y-053's ability to replicate complex, anomalous behaviors through narrative interaction. Upon completing the enacted narrative, SCP-Y-053 disengaged from the subject. D5122 subsequently presented significant psychological impairments, consistent with extended anomalous exposure, necessitating prolonged psychological intervention and continued observational support. Test Log Y53-EX4. Objective: explore SCP-Y-053's response when confronted with deliberately paradoxical narratives containing contradictory elements and narrative inconsistencies. Procedure: researchers produced an intentionally paradoxical text titled Convergence of the Shattered Threads, characterized by overt narrative contradictions, conflicting plot structures, and unstable characterizations. Subject D5310 was tasked with reading this narrative within the containment environment. Observation: SCP-Y-053 encountered immediate and notable difficulty inhabiting the paradoxical text, initially demonstrating irregular and inconsistent possession manifestations. Despite ongoing complications, SCP-Y-053 continued attempts at narrative fulfillment, resulting in increasingly erratic behavior patterns. After approximately 45 minutes, SCP-Y-053's behavior escalated into a severe OSE, displaying chaotic violence, unpredictable cognitive disruptions, and previously undocumented anomalous phenomena affecting the stability of the containment chamber. This anomalous activity culminated in SCP-Y-053 prematurely disengaging after 2 hours and 15 minutes. Subject D5310 subsequently exhibited pronounced cognitive deterioration and severe psychological trauma, necessitating intensive containment, prolonged cognitive rehabilitation therapies, and continued monitoring for potential residual anomalous effects. Test Log Y53-EX5. Objective: examine SCP-Y-053's response to entirely factual, emotionally neutral historical documents, lacking narrative conflict or emotive content. Procedure: Subject D5791 read Chronicles of Agricultural Developments in 18th Century Europe, a rigorously neutral historical text within SCP-Y-053's controlled containment environment. Observation: SCP-Y-053 demonstrated significant delay and evident reluctance, eventually manifesting approximately 2 hours after exposure commenced. Upon manifestation, SCP-Y-053 gradually modified the narrative content, introducing subtle yet increasingly violent fictional elements, incongruent with the historical context. Peak anomalous activity occurred approximately 3 hours into possession, exhibiting standard but moderately subdued possession phenomena, with minor poltergeist-like activity. SCP-Y-053 naturally detached following completion of the subsequently altered narrative. Post-interaction psychological evaluations indicated significant trauma inflicted upon D5791, mandating immediate psychological intervention and extended monitoring to address resultant psychological disturbances. Incident Report Y-53-1 Date February 4th, 2000. Location Site Y2, Translation and Narrative Research Division. Summary: SCP-Y-053 was initially discovered following an anomalous manifestation, triggered by a researcher's translation and reading of the private journal belonging to Ethelbert, a novelist renowned for dark and macabre fiction. Ethelbert had originally intended to author uplifting narratives, but ironically rose to fame through a darkly satirical tale echoing traditional Grimm Brothers narratives. Public demand for progressively darker content precipitated severe psychological deterioration, ultimately influencing Grimm's distorted perception of reality through a narrative-centric lens. Recovered journal analysis. The journal contained approximately 93 pages, densely filled with progressively disorganized, nonsensical, violent, and manic entries. Excerpts were analyzed to demonstrate the clear progression of cognitive destabilization. The following are a few examples. Entry 11. Early Stage.
Today ideas flow naturally, though darker than intended. Characters seem alive, whispering plots far grimmer than my designs. But readers enjoy the thrill. Perhaps this darkness is necessary.
Entry 29. Mid-Stage.
Shadows have begun to speak louder each night, demanding narratives steeped in blood and irony. My pen feels heavy, ink pooling unnaturally, forming shapes of things I've only imagined in feverish dreams.
Entry 47. Escalation.
The pages are screaming beneath my hand, words twisting into something monstrous. My reflection mocks me, smiling at secrets no man should ever know. What exactly am I?
Entry 68. Advanced Deterioration.
Reality frays at its edges. Ink and blood flow freely, indistinguishable, fueling stories I never intended to tell. Characters escape into my vision, enacting scenes of horror whenever I look.
Entry 92. Critical Deterioration.
There is no separation between tale and teller. The words are alive, devouring what remains of my insanity. The darkness whispers truth beyond comprehension. Ink drowning my voice.
Final page. Entry 93. The final page was notably inscribed by hand, using a mixture of blood and black ink, bearing the cryptic and disturbing statement:
My life is not but ink for a greater darkness.
Upon reading this final passage out loud, the researcher immediately triggered SCP-Y-053's initial anomalous manifestation, experiencing rapid onset symptoms of possession, including excessive ink secretion from facial orifices and aggressive attempts at narrative enactment. Foundation personnel rapidly intervened, successfully containing the anomaly and recovering the affected researcher for medical and psychological evaluation. The journal and associated materials were swiftly secured within specialized containment protocols. Immediate comprehension screenings and psychological support were provided to all personnel involved. Protocols were subsequently revised to include stricter narrative analysis oversight and psychological evaluations to prevent similar incidents. Incident Report Y-53-2. Date: February 6, 2000. Location: Site Y2, Literary Isolation Chamber. Summary: During controlled testing, D-Class Subject D4821 engaged with the narrative The Three Little Pigs. SCP-Y-053, who had previously inhabited the text, promptly manifested as the narrative's antagonist, the Big Bad Wolf, triggering intense possession symptoms in D4821. Under anomalous influence, D4821 aggressively pursued two observing staff members, explicitly identifying them as narrative characters, the Little Pigs, and forcibly enacted scenes involving predatory aggression and entrapment, causing significant physical harm. Containment interference provoked SCP-Y-053 into initiating a severe off-script event. The anomaly exhibited heightened physical strength and animalistic predatory behaviors, improvising shelters within the chamber from available materials, barricading personnel within these structures, and attempting arson consistent with the original narrative's climax. Any individuals who attempted to leave the clumsily built structure were immediately devoured by the Big Bad Wolf. Autonomous detachment only occurred after the narrative's forced completion, leaving affected personnel severely traumatized. Extensive medical and psychological rehabilitation protocols were subsequently enacted. Incident Report Y-53-3. Date: February 7th, 2000. Location: Site Y2, Literary Isolation Chamber. Summary: Under supervised conditions, D-Class Subject D5033 read Little Red Riding Hood. SCP-Y-053 rapidly assumed possession, again manifesting explicitly as the Big Bad Wolf. The entity demonstrated sophisticated psychological manipulation, enticing observing researchers into narrative-driven interactions under false pretenses, subsequently isolating and incapacitating them. Containment team intervention triggered an unprecedentedly violent OSE, involving grotesque ritualistic reenactments, incorporating explicit cannibalistic and symbolic elements absent from the original narrative. SCP-Y-053 exhibited pronounced cognitive sophistication, systematically exploiting personnel vulnerabilities and emotional states, significantly complicating containment operations. The anomalous event persisted for approximately 4 hours, concluding only upon narrative completion, at which point SCP-Y-053 autonomously detached. The aftermath included severe psychological trauma, substantial physical injuries, and over a dozen confirmed researcher fatalities, whose remains exhibited extensive anomalous activity, bleeding ink instead of human blood. Incident Y-53-4. Date: February 9th, 2000. Summary: During exposure to a contemporary crime thriller narrative, SCP-Y-053 swiftly inhabited the antagonist persona. Complex narrative contradictions and an inability to proceed with its preferred scene quickly triggered an intense OSE, characterized by extreme violence and targeted psychological manipulation directed towards observing personnel. SCP-Y-053 prematurely detached due to unresolved narrative contradictions, leaving significant psychological distress among involved staff, but minimal damage. Incident Report Y-53-5. Date: February 11th, 2000. Summary: After an unexpected, post-incident choice from SCP-Y-053, The anomaly decided to inhabit the book Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. After a D-Class had read the book, SCP-Y-053 manifested as a distorted iteration of the Mad Hatter, immediately initiating an event characterized by irrational violence, anomalous temporal disruptions, and pervasive cognitive confusion. During the event, SCP-Y-053 appeared to develop excessive anomalous capabilities, forcing several researchers to sit at an extended table, seemingly initiating a scene for a tea party. Individuals who partook of the tea at the tea party experienced severe distress, initiating an immediate seizure-like response, eventually leading to heart failure. SCP-Y-053 was seen snapping his fingers, resulting in one researcher's hands appearing on two other researchers' plates. The two researchers were anomalously compelled, as if starving, to eat the hands that had manifested on their plates. Several horrific events like this occurred before SCP-Y-053 decided to disembark from its host. The event's aftermath revealed severe, enduring psychological effects among personnel, necessitating comprehensive therapeutic interventions, extended analytical and theoretical considerations, comprehensive review and comparative analysis of SCP-Y-053 incidents consistently indicate the entity's pronounced predisposition toward classical narrative antagonists, notably the recurring Big Bad Wolf archetype. This recurring thematic presence suggests inherent cognitive predisposition or symbolic resonance with specific narrative constructs. SCP-Y-053's behaviors during OSEs notably involve escalating aggression, advanced cognitive manipulation, and significant challenges to containment protocol. Accordingly, containment strategies have undergone substantial revision, integrating enhanced narrative disruption technology, reinforced physical and procedural safeguards, mandatory comprehensive psychological screening, and extended rehabilitation programs for personnel exposed to SCP-Y-053. Continuous interdisciplinary research, rigorous narrative management, and proactive surveillance remain crucial in effectively mitigating SCP-Y-053's anomalous phenomena. The entity's adaptive nature, psychological manipulation capabilities, and propensity for violent narrative enactments necessitate ongoing containment refinements to preclude potential large-scale anomalous breaches. Given the anomaly's demonstrated ability to replicate other anomalous properties and exploit psychological vulnerabilities through narrative manipulation, stringent narrative controls, enhanced containment procedures, and ongoing interdisciplinary research are crucial. Continued study into SCP-Y-053's mechanisms of narrative influence may offer broader insights into anomalous cognitive phenomena, and inform the development of improved countermeasures against cognitively based anomalies. Proactive surveillance and containment refinement remain essential to mitigate SCP-Y-053's potential for large-scale narrative and psychological destabilization. This is Director Waller, signing off on another report at Site Y1. I hope you'll consider subscribing to stay up to date with our latest findings. I eagerly look forward to having your audience in future reports.